I will say this much. I think one thing that very quickly makes historic black leaders, revolutionary figures, civil rights icons very quickly change their mind about Israel. Because remember, Stalin was pro-Israel in its inception as well. And he's not obviously a historic black revolutionary leader or whatever. I'm just saying that, like, there were a lot of people in its formation that thought, like, oh, Israel's going to be communist, like, sick.
When you think of pop culture icons like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Tupac Shakur, Mark Twain, and Nelson Mandela, the first things that probably come to mind are physicist, peaceful activist, musician, author, and beloved politician. What likely doesn't come to mind are
that they're card-carrying, commie, radical tankies, freaking socialist, tanky, commie, anti-America. I hate all of them.
Labels like socialist, anti-capitalist, communist, anti-imperialist, or freedom fighter willing to take up arms. Why is that? Why is the mainstream narrative so eager to use these figures to serve its goals, yet when it comes time to acknowledge their radical politics, it suddenly can't be bothered, acting as if those parts of their legacy don't even exist? I mean, MLK, the dude's a hero. He championed civil rights at a time where the things he was saying were unpopular. He was incredibly brave and a symbol for perseverance in the fight for justice. Mainstream politicians today have no choice but to praise the man for his bravery and act as though they would have been on his side back in his day. But if history has shown us anything, it's that political moderates and status quo defenders are in favor of every human rights movement, except for the current one. And that's just it. All of the figures I'll be talking about in this video presented a challenge to the status quo. Their legacies are undeniable, and to avoid speaking about these figures would be impossible. So how does the mainstream narrative fit these radicals into public discourse? Well, it pretends that they weren't actually all too radical, that they weren't a threat to the status quo, that they were at most liberals, akin to the American Democratic Party, maybe. But this is a gross misrepresentation of history and a sanitization of the radical politics held by these beloved figures. If we're going to invoke the legacies of these icons, let's not do them the injustice of pretending that they were mere political moderates when...
Also, I wanna show you guys something. This fucking poll is actually nutty. I don't know how correct it is, but a new poll of Israeli Jews conducted by Penn State University reveals overwhelmingly 82% support of Gazans, a solid majority support of Israeli Arabs, nearly half, 47% supporting all Gazans in cities captured by the IDF. There's a breakdown of it I saw here. To the question, do you support the claim that the IDF in conquering enemy cities should act in a manner similar to the way the Israelites did when they conquered Jericho under the leadership of Joshua, i.e. to kill all its inhabitants? 47% of all respondents answered in the affirmative. The numbers are fucking nuts, dude. 65% of those surveyed answered that there is a current incarnation of Amalek, and of these 93% responded to the mitzvah to erase the memory of Amalek is also relevant to that contemporary Amalek. I don't know how... I don't know the sample size. I'll have to look at it, but no. It's not. No, it's not Penn State University students polled, chatter. Penn State University conducted the poll amongst all Israelis, but I assume specifically Israeli Jews maybe in this. Yeah, yes, the transfer, 82% of Jews in Israel favored deporting Gaza citizens. 20 years ago, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, the spiritual father of the Hilltop Youth, outlined a vision for the elimination of the democratic institutions and the establishment of Jewish supremacy. After October 7, it seems that this vision is coming true precisely before our eyes. In the midst of the protests against the disengagement plan, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg delivered a sermon in the Rose Garden next to the Knesset. Ginsburg, the head of the old Yosef Chai Yeshiva in Yitzhar, published the essay Bless the Man in honor of Baruch Goldstein, who, by the way, remember when I was talking about American imports that go to historic Palestine to do depraved acts of ultra violence? Baruch Goldstein is a great example of this, okay? When you take Jewish supremacy and American proclivity towards violence and when you melt that into one pot, you have on your hands an incredibly violent individual, okay? Like so violent that Israeli society, at least in an effort to, maybe you'll say it's in an effort to save face, but like they considered him a terrorist, okay? And his supporters were also considered terrorists. Now their supporters, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who had a photo of Baruch Goldstein in his house is, of course, the Interior Security Minister, as you guys know. So obviously, you know, they don't even, the masks are off at this point. Yeah, who was in administrative detention after Rabin's assassination and later also wrote a book that condoned of women and children from among the Gentiles. Then in January 2005, he outlined his supporters in Jerusalem a vision that essentially gave a kiss of death to the founding and naive idea of secular Zionism, a Jewish and democratic state. The sermon, well, by the way, this is also the inability of Zionism to address its fundamental flaw, which is that it is inherently an ethno-religious supremacist ideology, because as John Kerry once famously said, you can either have a Jewish state or a democratic state. You can't have both. That's it. That's it. Jewish state, democratic state. Not both. But liberal Zionists don't understand that. Liberal Zionists, or at least maybe some of them do, but they just like shelter that side of their brain. They just stop that side of their brain from talking or thinking, sorry. Because obviously, ethno-states, especially ethno-states built on top of indigenous land, are directly at odds with the notion of a secular democracy, or any democracy, as a matter of fact. Can't do that, okay? The sermon today, known as The Time to Crack the Nut, sought to instill the idea of Jewish supremacy in the land of Israel and to prepare the hearts for massacre Palestinians in the complete of the land. Now on the verge of completing the cracking and the success of the rabbi's plan, it's worth revisiting the poet's intentions. Don't really care about his intentions. Let's get to the polling here. To the question, do you support the claim that IDF when conquering an enemy city? We already covered that. It seems that Ginsburg and other Haredi rabbis can be especially proud of the change that has occurred in the Jewish population. 82% of those surveyed expressed their support for the forced expulsion of residents of the Gaza Strip. 82% of Israeli Jews support the forced expulsion of the residents of the Gaza Strip. Okay? Sample size is 2 paragraphs up. Just how appealing is the apocalyptic language offered by Ginsburg is to Israeli Jews from all walks of life who are thirsty for a solution to the Palestinian problem is shown by a survey conducted in March, which sought to examine a series of impolite questions, the place of which we would not recognize in surveys that are regularly conducted in Israel. The survey was conducted by one of the HMs at the request of Penn State University among 1,005 respondents. Decent sample size. That's crazy. It's not on the sample size alone. Oh my God. That is not a... Gaia, what are you doing? Place. Crazy. Among 1,005 respondents who constitute a representative sample of the Jewish population in Israel. Kaya, Oh. So yeah, do you support the claim of the idea of when conquering an enemy city? The Haredi rabbis can be especially proud. 82% of those surveyed expressed support for the forced expulsion of residents of the Gaza Strip, and 56% supported the forced expulsion of Arab citizens of Israel. Arab citizens of Israel. 56% of Israeli Jews living in Israel, according to this poll conducted by Penn State University, support the forced expulsion of Arab citizens in Israel, as in those who are Christian or Muslim that have Israeli citizenship, the Palestinian citizens of Israel. In the 2003 survey, the positive answers to these questions were only 45% and 31%, respectively. Only. Holy. That is an alarm bell ringing in 2003. No wonder it's got to this point. Further evidence of Ginsburg's great victory can also be seen in the widespread adoption of positions supporting it by the secular public, which has failed to present an alternative to Messianic Zionism in the form of an organized alternative anchored in the pursuit of human rights. 69% of secularists support the forcible expulsion of Gaza residents, and 31% of them see the extermination of Jericho residents as a precedent that the IDF should adopt. We are in the final stage of the Nazification of Israel. They are full-blown, not oblivious, and actually championing the ethnic expulsion of all non-Jews. It is crazy. Is this white supremacy? I mean, whiteness as a socio-political construct means the powerful in-group, and white would be a substitute for Jewish in this regard, considering that Israel is a Jewish ethno-state, a Jewish supremacist ethno-state. And therefore, I guess technically it would be the same. Not all Jews are white in the way that you understand it, obviously, but Jewish, by their own state designation, is a higher status than non-Jewish. This is why in Israel, the demographic designation applied is Jew or Arab. They say all Israelis that are not Jew are Arab. They categorize them all as Arab, and they categorize Jews as Jew, regardless of whether or not they have ethnic backgrounds from Arab countries or have Arab ethnic background in general. Itamar Ben-Gvir is another example that I keep using, but I will be using in this situation as well. He is from Iraq. He is Iraqi, Arab, Kurdish, and also Jewish. But in Israel, he is just Jewish. And no, most Israelis are not Ashkenazi. I don't know where the f you're getting this from. That is not true. Most Israelis in power, maybe, or Israel in its inception was supposed to be, Ashkenazi centered, but very quickly they realized that simply wasn't enough Ashkenazi Jews to populate the land. But no, the majority of Israeli Jews are not Ashkenazi. As a matter of fact, minority of Israeli Jews are Ashkenazi. The majority would be the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. Also, the Ashkenazi population numbers are a little iffy in and of itself. There's also a little bit of massaging of the numbers from Russia. Israel has done a lot of migration from Russia, especially after the dissolution of the USSR, but even before then, and certainly after, where people without even any Jewish ethnic or religious background were invited into the state of Israel to once again fulfill the ambitions of trying to make it as white as possible, to make Israel as white as possible. So are most Israelis not colonizers then? Well, let me explain it to you like this, okay? What do you think Turkey is doing in the North Syrian corridor right now? If Turkey were to permanently fucking occupy and ethnically displace the entire indigenous population of the Northern Syrian corridor and then put Turkish people there, would you say, well, they're not colonizers, it's just their fucking neighbor? No, of course you wouldn't say that. What do you mean? Do you think that only white people are capable of being colonizers? Do you think it means you can only do a settler colonial occupation if the people in the settler colonial entity are only Ashkenazi Jews coming from Europe or Eastern Europe or Russia? No, of course not. Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews are also, as long as they are not indigenous to historic Palestine, are settler colonial occupants. Yeah, does this chatter not know about Ireland, Lamau? Maybe. I think if they're indigenous to the land, then it's kind of fair game. Brother, what the fuck are you talking, or sister, what are you talking about? They're not indigenous to that land. You think all of that area is the same. That's not how this works. What? Like, okay, just why doesn't it all just become greater Saudi Arabia then? You know what I mean? Or fuck it. Why doesn't it all become greater Iran? Think. They're all from that area. You are so bad at explaining this. What the fuck are you saying? I'm giving historic examples as to why this is stupid. These are separate people from different parts of a fucking region that comprises all the way from Northern Africa all the way to Lebanon. Okay? The notion that they are all from that area and therefore they're not actually engaging in the act of settler colonial violence is fucking idiotic. I gave an example of Turkey potentially doing something similar. I gave an example of Iran in a hypothetical taking the rest of the fucking region. After all, they're still from there, right? Obviously, those circumstances would be completely unacceptable. And the reason for why it would be unacceptable is because, well, they're not from there. That's a whole ass different state. It's ironic considering that this is precisely what Nazi Germany was doing with Lebensraum. Like the idea that there was this greater Germanic European expansion campaign where we would just populate the rest of Eastern Europe with Germans, you know? Anyway, yeah, greater Israel. That's next. Why do you keep asking me about Neil Druckmann? I don't give a fuck about Neil Druckmann. All right, let's get back to this video.
Their radical beliefs were an inseparable part of who they were. From beloved authors like Mark Twain, who openly opposed American imperialism in the Philippines, calling himself an anti-imperialist, and declaring he was opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land, to socialist satirists like Kurt Vonnegut, to politicians like Nelson Mandela, who praised, supported, and trained alongside the armed resistance fighters of French-occupied Algeria. This video will offer a glimpse into the beliefs of these figures that are often censored. Quick disclaimer before we go any further, this video is not a blanket approval of the character of these figures. Many of them were flawed in their own ways, as we all are. I'll just be shining a light on the radical aspects of their characters that are purposefully forgotten. So before you feel the need to remind me that Albert Einstein's personal life was pretty questionable. Yeah, I know, that has nothing to do with his politics. Speaking of his politics, what were they? When Albert wasn't writing about mass energy equivalents or the serpentine shape of streams, he didn't shy away from expressing his dislike toward capitalism. He disliked the fact that the ruling class could often trace their power back to colonial conquest. They seized for themselves a monopoly of the land and appointed a priesthood from among their own ranks. Einstein wrote in his 1949 essay, Why Socialism?, in which he set out to make the case for exactly what the title suggests. He affirmed the idea that human development was unfortunately still in a predatory phase due to the way that capitalism and rugged individualism stripped the individual away from society and forced them to hyper-focus solely on themselves with little regard for the well-being of others. In Einstein's view, this played a role in the deterioration of the fabric of society and the dismantling of our humanity. Einstein argued that a capitalist economy was detrimental to a person's development and maturation, that it just wasn't good for us and it would not yield ideal results. He believed capitalism would cause us to retract from one another and become cold, callous, and indifferent to the suffering of our neighbors. He worried we would eventually forget that while individual achievements and liberties are valuable and worth striving for, they're ultimately made possible within the context of a broader society, and that society's well-being should not be ignored. The individual is able to think, feel, strive, and work by himself, but he depends so much upon society in his physical, intellectual, and emotional existence that it's impossible to think of him or to understand him outside the framework of society. It is society which provides man with food, clothing, a home, the tools of work, language, the forms of thought, and most of the content of thought. His life is made possible.
This guy seems kind of fucking woke, dude. I don't know about this guy. Bet he was a fucking anti-Semite, too. That's how all these fucking woke socialists are like. You already know. You already know where this is going. Disgusting.
Possible through the labor and the accomplishments of the many millions past and present who are all hidden behind the small word, society. It is evident, therefore, that the dependence of the individual upon society is a fact of nature which cannot be abolished. Capitalism and its accompanying obsession with individualism, Einstein believed, would ultimately lead us to resent one another, to resent the very society that made possible all we enjoy and take for granted, by turning us against each other. The individual has become more conscious than ever of his dependence upon society, but he does not experience the dependence as a positive asset, as an organic tie, as a protective force, but rather as a threat to his natural rights, or even to his economic existence. To Einstein, this was more than just an economic discussion, though he did briefly address the logistics. It transcended that and became a question of salvaging the unique characteristics of humankind and preserving our ability to empathize and build with one another. The economic anarchy of capitalist society as it exists today is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil. We see before us a huge community of producers, the members of which are unceasingly striving to deprive each other of the fruits of their collective labor, not by force, but on the whole in faithful compliance with legally established rules. Private capital tends to become concentrated in few hands, he goes on to write. And to Einstein, this would inevitably lead to an oligarchy of private capital, the enormous power of which cannot be effectively checked even by a democratically organized political society. He foresaw that private capitalists would become powerful enough to buy off our schools, radio stations, newspapers, and even politicians. The inherently anti-democratic nature of a prolonged capitalist society is abundantly clear today, but keep in mind, he wrote this in 1949, and history, at least in my opinion, has vindicated him. The obsession with profit over utility, the overall instability of the leading to inevitable economic catastrophes, Einstein was very critical of it all, and the solution he proposed was socialism. I'm convinced that there is one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy, accompanied by an educational system which would be oriented towards social goals. In such an economy, the means of production are owned by society itself and are utilized in a planned fashion. He finishes off his essay by reminding us that a planned economy alone is not socialism, and that it must be implemented in a humanistic way that allows dignity and liberty to the individual. Hey, it's editor Isaac here. As I was teasing this video, the one that you're currently watching, someone put me onto a similar piece about Einstein with similar messaging, a lot more detail, and an incredible analysis by Dr. Fatima. And I wanted to share it with you guys because it's a really great video by a really great creator, so go check it out. So you might be wondering why I walked you through his essay instead of just leaving it at, yeah, dude was a socialist, and that's because it's important to understand just how much of a socialist he was. how deeply he despised capitalism, how strongly he believed it would literally deteriorate the essence of humanity if it wasn't discarded. He was actually such a troublemaker back in his day that the FBI compiled a massive file on him because of his radical views. Some even suspected he was a communist spy. But when we talk about him today, this side is strategically left out. Instead, his name is used as a synonym for genius by the very same groups of people who would hate the way he thought if they actually knew him. It's a pattern we see over and over. Radicals get sanded down, their politics erased so they can be safely celebrated without challenging the status quo. From musical legends like Tupac Shakur, whose affinity for revolutionary leftist causes is seldom acknowledged, to literary icons like Jean-Paul Sartre, whose writings now appear on the Instagram stories of liberals who would likely disapprove of everything he stood for if they actually knew what that was. I mean, this is hilarious. This guy spent the past 18 months calling any and everyone a terrorist sympathizer, then turns around and starts posting Sartre quotes on the gram, completely oblivious to Jean-Paul's strong support for anti-colonial armed resistance and the FLN in Algeria. If Sartre were alive today, H3H3 Productions would be making fucking content nukes about him. Another figure whose legacy is just too big to ignore, so instead it's sanitized and declawed, is the late, great Martin Luther King Jr. Every year around MLK Day, or the anniversary of his assassination, we get to see all the corporate media outlets run their annual segment about the man and how he would definitely hate the opposing political party if he were alive.
For the record, one of the grossest things that people do is talk about MLK with relation to Israel. And MLK definitely was weakest on Israel out of all these historic figures that we're talking about. Like weaker, I would say, like around, I don't know the full extent of Sartre's perspective on Israel, but there, like, I think he was, he definitely was Sartre was a little bit of a dick rider, if I recall correctly. MLK, on the other hand, also, MLK died the year after the 6-Day War. He didn't have a chance to see it all unfold. No, there are sentiments that MLK has made about the 6-Day War in particular, and like what Israel should do, which is to like give the land back, and that this will create further enmity and further anger and resentment towards Israel. But he certainly did not have the same moral clarity on Israel that he did with like fucking even the Vietnam War. Like MLK was anti-Vietnam War, pro-Cuba, but on Israel he definitely had like a little bit too much of a religious interest. I wouldn't say he was pro-Israel, but he definitely wasn't as anti-Zionist as like Malcolm X was, for example. Having said that, you know, he don't got internet. You know what I mean? So what? This video isn't about that? No, I know, but I don't care. I'm still just adding additional. What? This is what I do. I add additional information that you might not know.
Today.
I was thinking, like, if he were alive today, I wonder what he'd think about a Democrat Party that believes it can regain power by living in a constant state of protest.
He stressed the content of one's character, remember? He would be furious if he saw these pesky protesters constantly bitching about systemic and structural reform, right? Wrong. Like, super wrong, actually. If there's one thing about the man's legacy that gets
I will say this much. I think one thing that very quickly makes historic black leaders, revolutionary figures, civil rights icons very quickly change their mind about Israel. Because remember, Stalin was pro-Israel in its inception as well. And he's not obviously a historic black revolutionary leader or whatever. I'm just saying that, like, there were a lot of people in its formation that thought like, oh, Israel's going to be fucking communist, like sick. We're going to have another like socialist nation state. Pretty cool. Like that was a legitimate opinion that a lot of people shared at that point. And of course, you know, then people went and saw it and very quickly were like, oh no, oh no, this was horrible. Was a horrible mistake. Or even people who were more tapped in, like Einstein, very quickly were like, hey, this is getting real fashy. Not good for me. I don't like it. I think you guys are becoming Nazis. Please stop. But, Yeah, even Noam Chomsky, numerous people like Gabor Mate, incredibly important, prominent anti-Zionist, Holocaust survivor Gabor Mate, also at its inception was a Zionist. Remember, he survived the Holocaust, okay? Because Israel in its inception, and a version of this still happens, but like to a lesser degree, because it's become this monolithic force of fascism at this point. But like at its inception, especially, it has something for everybody. Theodore Herzl was a very, very intelligent piece of shit. He 100% designed this entire project in a way where, like, if you were a religious Jew, well, Judea and Samaria, Israel, it's a very important place for religions and specifically for the Jews, even though like the initial reaction from a lot of the more religious Jews was like, what the fuck are you saying? It literally says we are stateless until the Messiah comes back. But if you were secular, Israel was providing you a secular socialist utopia in the desert. And the idea that like if you're a communist, you love the kibbutzim. Like it did not matter. There was something for everybody. If you were a racist piece of shit, you know, Jabotinsky. If you were like racist, there was plenty of ethnic cleansing that you could do, right? So while technically it was always a ethno-nationalist ideology, people's positions in the beginning, especially when information was not as readily available too, since you didn't have really fucking didn't have the internet again, people's opinions initially was very different. And then you have Bernie Sanders, who also is from the kibbutzim mentality, who seemingly has never lost the pure fantasy of a labor Zionist Israel. And that is part of the reason why he keeps saying Israel has a right to defend itself 19 months into a fucking genocide, which is embarrassing. Again, like, come on, dude. Come the fuck on. Anyway, yeah, there's also systematic cover-up after 47-48 until think about it this way. The Nakba was obviously a known event for Palestinians. They didn't just like materialize on the fucking Gaza Strip, where 70% of the people that are living there out of the 2 million plus population literally is not from the Gaza Strip originally. They know what was up, but Israeli society had completely refused to even entertain Plan Dalet and numerous other mechanizations of ethnic displacement and ethnic cleansing that took place in the inception of the Israeli state until recently. So much so that there is an entire new wing of historians in Israel called the New Historians, some of which we like a lot and some of which we despise, even though they had very important works that were necessary in uncovering the truth. The New Historians, of course, is Benny Morris, who is the guy who also uncovered the systematic nature of the ethnic displacement and ethnic cleansing campaign that the initial Zionist brigades were engaging in, but then also landed on the side of it was necessary and good. And then you have the Ilan Papes of the world, who also did the same, but landed on the side of, oh my God, this is Nazi shit, not very good. Or Avi Shlaim is another one as well. So, you know, that is a relatively new part of uncovering the truth about Israel's history. Think about that. Were there not any Palestinian historians? No, of course there were Palestinian historians, but obviously in terms of history, it's not just about like these guys were being violent and we left. The importance of the new historians in this instance is uncovering historic proof on the Jewish side, on the Israeli side, on the Zionist side. Of course, there were Palestinian historians, and there's also still living people that experienced the Nakba. And also, half of the new historians actually were collecting information from the living Palestinians that experienced the Nakba. It's not like they were, that played a very important role. Your career is over, bud. Okay, sure, bud.
constantly swept under the rug. It's his desire for actual economic change in regards to the institutions of America. He stressed the significant link between the need for systemic change on a material level and the ideological progressivism that would follow. In King's The Three Evils of Society speech, he said, "We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism," he said in a 1966 speech in front of his staff.
"We will make his dream come true."
Yeah, that's great, man. Everyone should strive to uphold King's dream of equality and harmony, but we should also strive to uphold his ideas of economic reconstruction instead of pretending like defenders of the status quo, liberal and conservative alike, invoke MLK whenever it's convenient, but they strategically ignore a crucial part of his perspective. Around the time of his death, his disapproval rating was 63%. The same political forces that now whitewash his legacy.
Yeah, white people were not rocking with MLK at all. Like they love to act like they were so on board, which for the record, is that all that surprising? I mean, look at the way they fucking respond to people being like, "Hey man, can you stop killing children? Israel, please stop killing children." And the reaction to that, of course, is you are the most anti-Semitic person that has ever existed, perhaps more anti-Semitic than Adolf Hitler. Okay? You know how fucking libs are, dude. They have always been this way. This is what I try to explain to people all the time, where it's like, dude, just stay at it. Okay? Stay at it. History will vindicate you. And all of those liberals that spent every fucking waking moment attacking you and saying that you fucking suck, saying that you're bad, saying that you're too radical, are going to come to your conclusions later down the line and hang their heads in shame as they say, "Oh, we too were on board with this. We too were on board with this cause." Okay? Yes, it is not a popularity contest. It is a morality contest. And these assholes are evil as fuck. But also at the same time, like, it is a little bit of a popularity contest too. You are cooked though. Yeah, I'm so cooked. It's over. My career is Jover, dude. Yeah. Just like I was cooked right after October 7, when a third of this fucking community left and we're like, "I can't believe how radical your perspective is. I can't believe how crazy what you're saying is." These are people that have been victimized, just like this was a genocide that took place on October 7. How dare you say this? How dare you say that Israel is still ultimately the responsible party? How dare you? Well, I said it because I was more aware of the 75-year history than you were. You know? Okay, then you cook Twitch ads. Wait, what? I cook Twitch ads? The fuck are you talking about? The fuck? Yeah, at a time of unprecedented rollback of marketing campaigns, partially due to the insane tariff agenda that cooked global trade, I must be the responsible party. Also, what's the argument? You want to see more ads? Like, I'm so confused. How did I do that?
Him when he was alive. It's only now that he can no longer mobilize the masses or threaten the capitalist system that he's been safely recast as an American hero, as a political moderate even. But King had some choice words for the political moderate, particularly of the Caucasian variety, and it's safe to say that he wouldn't approve of his legacy being used to legitimize milquetoast politics. Letter from a Birmingham jail. King writes, "I must confess that over the past few years I have been
obviously this is my favorite bars. This is like, hold up, his writing was this fire? Hold up, his writing was this fire? The answer is yes.
Disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the African American's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the African American to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. For obvious reasons, this letter of his has been selectively remembered and subjected to soft erasure. King's critique of the white moderate, someone who pays lip service to a cause but denounces every effective method of achieving change, still rings true today. Take the oppression of Palestinians, one of, if not the most pressing issue of our time. The political moderate will assure you that they're on the right side of history, that they feel for the Palestinians, yet they disapprove of every and any action taken to resist the suffering.
Yeah, who could that be about, bro? I just can't seem to place my finger on it. Who does that sound like, dude?
The apartheid and the genocide, even peaceful and non-lethal ones. In regard to the Palestinian plight, figures like Nelson Mandela and his contributions toward dismantling apartheid in South Africa will often get brought up. Certain groups like to paint him as if he were opposed to violent resistance, and in some cases, as if he were a full-blown pacifist. But that isn't true. Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, was the armed paramilitary wing.
Damn, overzealous is a white boy with maximum swag for dropping that perfectly, I feel like. At least according to my understanding, and I don't know how to say that at all, and I always just say MK instead of the word because it's hard to pronounce.
Wing of the ANC, co-founded by Mandela himself. Mandela grew increasingly in favor of anti-colonial armed resistance once it became clear to him that peaceful means of resisting simply weren't working. In a now famous speech given by Mandela during his 1964 Riviona trial, Mandela defended his choice to escalate to violent resistance. We felt that without violence, there would be no way open to the African people to succeed in their struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition.
Yeah, people are just like, why do you think he went to prison? Like, you think he just went to prison because they were like, oh, I mean, part of it was because he was black. Okay, let's be real. But like the other part of it was because he went and trained with fucking the FLN, and then he came back and he was ready for a fucking violent revolution.
Opposition to this principle had been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we had to either accept a permanent state of inferiority, or we chose to defy the law. We first broke the law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence, when this form was legislated against, and then the government resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies. Only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. It would be unrealistic and wrong for African leaders to continue preaching peace and nonviolence at a time when the government met our peaceful demands with force. The US even had Mandela on their terror watch list until 2008, when Bush signed a bill to remove him. Gotta love the irony of an actual cold-blooded mass murderer deciding who is and isn't a terrorist. Mandela's worldview and actions in South...
He was like, the list is getting too expansive. We need to clear some space. You know when you delete some old video games because like your hard drive is almost maxed out? It's kind of like that, because he was like, oh, get ready. Post 9/11, war on terror, like, got to clear up more space for all of the Muslims.
South Africa were greatly inspired by the FLN in Algeria. He praised the Algerian National Liberation Front many times and even traveled to Morocco in 1962 to train alongside them. The Algerian army made me a man, Mandela declared. It's worth noting that the FLN was considered a terrorist organization by the US during their fight for liberation against France's brutal occupation. After they exhausted peaceful means of resistance, they eventually opted to up the ante, and they carried out bombings, assassinations, and urban guerrilla warfare in the attempt to free themselves. The US also considered them to be a broader communism threat due to their links with socialist governments, yet Mandela's support for them remained consistent and unwavering. He never denounced their armed resistance because he understood that their original peaceful means of resisting did nothing but lead to events like the Sétif and Guelma massacre, where peaceful Algerian civilians and protesters were slaughtered by the French. Far from condemning their armed resistance, Mandela was actually deeply motivated by it. Mandela palled around with plenty of people the West considered enemies, from Castro to Gaddafi, the kinds of leaders who backed the ANC when the so-called free world wouldn't. Nelson was so thankful for Castro's and the Cuban military's support in ending apartheid that he traveled to Cuba in 1991 to show his gratitude in person. We have come here today recognizing our great debt to the Cuban people. What other country has such a history of selfless behavior as Cuba has shown for the people of Africa? How many countries benefit from Cuban healthcare professionals and educators? How many of these volunteers are now in Africa, needed help from Cuba and has not received it? How many countries threatened by imperialism or fighting for their freedom have been able to count on the support of Cuba?
God, the way we treat Cuba is so fucking evil. It's like probably... I mean, America has a long history of horrifying things that we've done, but like one of the ever-present, never-ending forms of cruelty is our unjustifiable sanctions on Cuba. Is crazy. Like, unironically, it's just because they're sick. They're cool. Like, that's it. We have chose to starve out. We have chose to starve out Cuba for the crime of being cool and dope and awesome and also having a successful socialist revolution. It is disgusting.
When you, Comrade Fidel, yesterday said that our cause is your cause, I know that that sentiment came from the bottom of your heart and that that is the feeling of all of the people of revolution.
Was Cuba's position on Palestine? If the USSR still existed, Cuba would have already like sent military equipment to Hamas. That's Cuba's position on Palestine, at least judging by what they've done historically with apartheid. Nelson Mandela is recognizing. They literally would have already sent, they would have deployed troops straight up.
Revolutionary Cuba. This side of his character, these deep-seated beliefs of his, would never be known if you just accepted the mainstream narrative about him. It's very important that these historical figures and pop culture icons are celebrated and cherished for the good that they've done, for the achievements and innovation that they've imparted on society. But when we only tell parts of
would they though with the US right there? I mean, they did it in Africa. That's why I said judging by what they did historically.
Their stories and leave out the radical aspects of their characters, we do them a disservice through omission. These great minds were great for a reason. Let that reason be known.
Another overzealots banger, by the way. Fucking this guy, dude.